Interesting graphic. It's sort of what the inside of my head looks like. Which is why it feels like we're all in a bit of a waking nightmare. The reason I wanted you guys on today, and first of all, hello, and I'm so grateful to both of you. I know it's a busy week, but aren't they all? And I think we all had in mind that we might have an emergency session or two this week to deal with the indictments and what are they and the fallout. But it instead, and the reason I think this is, if not an emergency, somewhat urgent is because once again, uh, the entire system has been manipulated by the lie of one man who shouldn't even be allowed on the stage anymore. I've been thinking about this a lot. There are so many awful consequences to not holding powerful people accountable. And when it comes to our most recent history, one of the things I think that's been most potentially damaging, has been damaging and may prove to be fatally so, is the fact that by not um, by not convicting him in the Senate after he'd been impeached twice, by not shutting down the big lie, by not severely punishing not just the people who committed the insurrection, but the people who planned it and incited it. We have, and obviously these things didn't happen chronologically. The insurrection happened after the election, but I think was in part because certain other things were allowed to happen. So we have in 2020, 74 million people were allowed to vote for somebody, to express their support for him with their votes, because he was allowed to run. He was allowed to run as a normal candidate. And thereby they emboldened him, they empowered each other, and we're in a situation now where their ideology is being amplified and metastasizing. His lies are being amplified, his influence is being amplified, and here we are again with one lie. The entire media in the United States ground to a halt, and nothing happened. Dahlia, am I crazy to think that that is a serious sign of dysfunction? Isn't a strong enough word, but you know where I'm going.
I would just say, let's pay attention to two things you just said. Hi, you guys. It's good to see you. One is, this is how they did the Mueller report, right? Is he gets out ahead of it and he does a framing and he's like, no collusion. And then the press is like, well, no collusion. There's no such thing as collusion. But okay, by that point, he'd owned the narrative, he'd picked the nomenclature, and we all just were like, okay, I guess we'll report no collusion, right? So this is for the playbook. It's to get out ahead of the thing that is going to happen and to diffuse it both by distorting it and to claim center stage, right? So that's one thing. And you're exactly right. The press for the last week has been doing the shabbiest version of like sports reporting. Is it going to be Fonnie Willis in the in the ballroom with the lead pipe, or will it be Alvin Bragg in the library with the no, this is not a freaking
with the rope and curdle mustard.
It's not a spectator sport. And so I think we've just done, and then we all turn on each other as we do, right? And then we're like, oh, this is the wrong one to bring, Alvin Bragg sucks. We should have waited for Jack, so this is how we play it. And it's consumed, you're quite right, the bulk of the conversation. So that's one thing that you said that I think is really important, is we just fall for the same pantsing over and over and over again, and we do it en masse, right? Yeah. That's one. Here's the other thing, and I will not belabor this. The stuff we don't cover when we're standing watching them put up fencing in Manhattan in the event that something might happen is actually the demise of democracy, right? It really is things that are happening on state levels, state Supreme Court races, disempowering governors from having veto power, saying that you can't bring ballot initiatives by, in states that used to be like that is actually the end of democracy. And we're watching them put up fencing. So those two things I think are quite worrying in
And
tandem.
you know what, Dahlia? It's also like if for some bizarre reason your criterion for something that's newsworthy is something that includes Donald Trump, there's also stuff going on that is about him that is also potentially important. And I'm thinking of the revelations in DC about what happened. That was literally unheard of. I think that the crime fraud exception was pierced, and like there was this flurry of briefs that were one was demanded at midnight. The rebuttal was demanded at 6
Yep.
a.m.
Yep.
Right? We have all sorts of other developments. Except of course, in Georgia, we're still learning that imminent does not mean what we think it means. But that's what are you going to do? But you're right. There's so much going on in the country. This Wisconsin State Supreme Court race is in less than 2 weeks. That may be the most important race of the last 2 years. Well, yeah, 2 years. It's 2023. It is almost April of 2023. And look, I think, Jen, one of the very tricky things here is because thanks to as Kurt Bardella, our fellow Nerd Avenger, has been hammering on all week in his many unpaid MSNBC appearances and in an LA Times article, the fact that it is beyond absurd at this point to give the Republican Party any benefit of the doubt. They are 100% behind Donald. They're not looking for an off-ramp. So he's the most powerful person in the Republican Party. He's the de facto leader of the Republican Party. That makes him one of the most powerful people in the country. We can't ignore him. However, we need to choose when he gets our attention. This week was not that time. So it is a bit of a conundrum. And I'm wondering if you think that there is, I don't know, are there some ground rules? Because otherwise what happens is he doesn't just take over the narrative, he reinvents it entirely.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing is this kind of, the whole if it bleeds, it leads has kind of turned into if there's not something happening today, if it happened yesterday, it's not news. And so, what's stunning to me is how little attention is paid to the fact that the Trump organization, which is the Trump Corporation and the Trump Payroll Corporation, was convicted by a jury in a case brought by Alvin Bragg in December and was this year, like last month or the month before, sentenced to pay $1.6 million. And this company is eponymous. It is the Trump, sorry, Mary, but it is the Donald Trump's, your uncle's actual corporation.
And Jen, it's also a person apparently, because no people really were punished. It was just the corporation doing all of this by
actual
itself.
Weisselberg, who pleaded guilty to these things, is human, and his actual human body is in Rikers Island right now. Yeah. This is huge. Yes. And the fact, I mean, I really wish there, instead of focusing on can this dude be a legit candidate for the Republican Party if X, Y, and Z happens, where in the world are the questions about the fact that this guy who promised he was going, like, one thing he promised he was going to do when he became president was not be involved in the corporation. He was flipping signing checks to pay back Michael Cohen for paying off Stormy Daniels. What? We were told that he wasn't going to be involved in it. Like, there's so much stuff that I just don't know. Is it just me, or does everybody have the memory of a goldfish in this country? And no
which
offense
is
to goldfish. I mean,
well,
they're fine creatures, but I would not want them to be, running, I don't know, a newsroom.
that only works if you are a football player in Ted Lasso. Okay, we don't want goldfish. You're right. We do not want
Is this the new
goldfish.
season? Because I'm
No,
like a couple seasons behind.
you're all of the seasons behind if you don't know about the goldfish. But for those of you watching us right now who don't,
What is the
that's
goldfish
a
thing? Because I
very good.
know about the
The reason
shortbread.
goldfish have a very tiny short-term memory.
Yeah.
So the
Obviously,
whole
I
thing
have a
is,
short-term memory
if something
too now.
bad happens, be a goldfish. Just
Oh, no,
forget
no, no,
it
no,
and
no,
move
no,
on.
no, no, no. I get you. No,
I'm
sorry,
not
Mary.
explaining it to you. I'm explaining
Also,
it
by the
to
way, since I've
other people.
diverted the conversation a little bit, I like the UMass Amherst sweatshirt. 'Cause,
Yes, that's
I
from
taught
when
there at one point.
Ave was looking at. Oh, cool. It's beautiful. It's when Ave and I were looking at.
But this is,
college.
I'm not, like, I don't, I'm really serious. This isn't like, I am just astonished that this guy, that the idea that we're just going to sit around and wait for more indictments. There's been a conviction by a jury, right? And also that anyone has any doubts that Alvin Bragg can't get the job done.
Yeah.
What an insult.
Yeah. Dahlia, go ahead.
No, I just want to, if I can broaden it out for one second, I would also say this has become my complaint about the way we cover the Supreme Court, right? That we have like 24 overheated hours of like affirmative action. Will they, won't they? Sports writing. And then Ketanji said, and then Alito said, and then 5. And then we go dark. And then for 2 weeks in June, we count noses, who won, who got in the best slam.
Mm-hmm.
And then we walk away. Like, who remembers what happened last term to the EPA at the Supreme Court? Who remembers what happened with school funding at the Supreme Court? And so we just are so obsessed with, I don't even know if it bleeds, it leads. It's like we have this like need to be shocked out of our stupor with what is unerringly bad sports reporting about an event that is of critical importance, and then we just go back on snooze.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
what's terrible?
Hang on a second. Hang on 1 second, Jen. You had a great interview, Dahlia, with Michael, whose name I can't pronounce. So if you
Podhorzer, yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Legend.
About that issue, and anybody who's not listening to Amicus is doing it wrong. Same thing for Booked Up, but it's not a little off topic. We'll talk about that later. But this your latest interview was absolutely essential listening in order to understand what you just said. And the whole it bleeds, nothing happened. No, nothing was bleeding. I mean, there wasn't even
anticipation of blood,
Okay, but check your sources. There was one source. His name was Donald Trump, the most notorious liar in human history. And he did it to change the subject, to deflect. So
wait. One more reason. He made at least $1.5 million, dude. So, okay, but I want to, at least. So what Dahlia said, it's interesting about this. The problem with covering this, like sports, is that sports teams, for the most part, end up having a level playing field. In other words, the game is over. And in theory, I mean, I know some teams have more money and et cetera, but there are rules. And the idea is you're competing on a level playing field. No one has moved the goalposts. The rules are the same from year to year to year. The problem with treating politics or Supreme Court decisions like that is that it's more like actually a flipping war, because the boundaries between, when our rights are taken away, we have lost physical and spatial autonomy. We just lost Dahlia. Her right to speak was taken away.
God, they're ruining everything.
But if you think about it, what it's not. When the Shelby County decision came down, it was a huge blow to voting rights. We don't just start where we started at the same 50-yard line the next season. This is not a game. This is literally has real consequences on who can show up to vote, who gets counted, whose rights are recognized, and the rest of it.
Yeah. And I hope Dahlia comes back, because I wanted to.
Dahlia, was it something I said?
I somehow, like when you inexplicably lose internet and you just start screaming at your 17-year-old and it's totally not his fault.
That's not very nice.
No. Mm-mm.
He deserves the benefit of the doubt, unlike Donald. Um, so your point earlier, Dahlia. Well, there are a couple of things I want to talk about. I do think it is important that we try to have some insight into Donald's state of mind, et cetera, but only at certain points. And, we kind of at this point need to take it as a given that he's just going to get away with shit. And we're just going to have it to leave it to the sociologists and psychologists in the future to figure out what happened and why. But then there is the fact that the wrong angle is taken. Brian had an interesting piece on perspective, as if perspective can stand in for reality or take the place of reality, right? And there was there was a headline. I didn't read the article because I don't care, but the headline in the Washington Post, I thought it was the New York Times at first. It was so egregiously bad. Was on the trail, freewheeling Donald Trump counters scripted Ron DeSantis, as if Donald Trump isn't the greatest traitor to this country that we've ever seen, except maybe for Robert E. Lee, and as if Ron DeSantis isn't a full-blown fascist. Like, if we're starting from there, then the hill we have to climb, I mean, we're all just Sisyphus at this point.
I thought you were referencing the headline that described Donald Trump, subject to several impending indictments. This is the new normal. Like, literally calling it the new normal. Like, how about the new fucking crazy instead of like normalizing the crazy? And it was I had that same, like, who writes these headlines? Like, you have just determined this is our new normal and we have to live under that.
It's Dean Beck-Hay. I'm convinced of it. But Dahlia, I think that is one of the reasons the Republican, besides potential blackmail, who knows, one of the reasons the Republican Party has stuck with him is because they learned his lesson. Just keep pushing the envelope, keep being outrageous, keep pushing the envelope. The more you do it, the more you're going to get away with it. And they shift, that window shifts. And next thing you know, the thing that has always up until this point been utterly disqualifying, and in the not too distant future, it was having a bad character. Now it's almost compulsory in the Republican Party to be a criminal if you want to get in the club.
And I think the problem on our side of the aisle is when there is, a Democrat who has a decent idea, or they have policies that are in the right place. There's always, some sort of like tattletale goody two shoes raising their hand going, oh, but technically this amendment, and we have so much flipping infighting. And for a party that is supposed to be about access to justice and making the world more fair, it turns out to be a lot of backstabbing, jockeying for a position and hierarchy, in part because we have, I think, a lot of people who care about fairness and justice and ideas want to be accurate, want to have the information right. But there's a place and time for that. You can tell someone off screen, offline, off the editorial pages, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Why don't you fix this or fix that? But instead, just because everyone's trying to say, because everyone in the Fox world and everything is always yelling that everyone's a socialist or this is a terrible idea, people want to be out there as, yeah, I get you, I want to meet you halfway, and I agree that and we should just it's like what Ronald Reagan said. He said the first rule in the Republican Party is don't attack other Republicans. We're never gonna ever win and maintain our power if we're backstabbing each other in public, period.
Yeah, and first of all, I want to talk about the Senate briefly. First, I just want to say Kirsten Sinema is a horrible human being. So that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, really. But I think it's worth pointing out.
She no longer caucuses with us, so it's okay that you say that.
Wait, she doesn't caucus with the Democrats anymore?
Isn't that right?
No, she's not a Democrat anymore, but she caucuses like Angus King or Sanders.
Oh, so she's an independent caucus with us.
I mean,
okay.
at least
I guess you can still
as
say
of this
that.
minute.
Okay.
But Mitt Romney's doing everything in his power. But whatever, she's just a terrible person. And just the sort of the backbiting and the gossiping just reminded me of this article about her ridiculous behavior. But more to the point, what's interesting, Dahlia, is that after the election last year in November, I thought, okay, the Democrats have a year to start fixing the Democratic Party before we start challenging whoever the Republican nominee is. And the House seems to be hanging together better. And in the Senate, we see, well, two things. One, in the Senate, Dick Durbin not getting rid of the blue slip. I mean, that is like a layup. And then I know he's not in the Senate anymore, but it speaks to the completely at this point, I believe, obscene collegiality in the Senate when it's not just obscene, but inappropriate, ineffective, and dangerous. Al Franken having Lindsey Graham on as his guest on The Daily Show, just, having a blast. Are you going to vote for Donald? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. You're going to vote. Okay, cool. That's great. I mean, these people keep getting a pass because, it's not just Donald who needs to be exposed as if we don't have enough proof. We need to keep hammering on the fact that it's all of them that are trying to turn this country into a fascist autocracy. I mean, what else can you say at this point?
So let me be the unlikely voice of hope here, because I think
like you and Daniel are always trying to wrong foot me here. All right, Hope.
I feel like we started this week when we talked on Monday, the three of us, referencing Donald Trump summoning the mob.
Yeah.
And the mob turns out to be like 50 reporters and one guy, right? There's no mob. Nobody, right. Nobody is, and I want to just point out, I completely stipulate that you are correct in describing the problem. This has been the problem since we've all been podcasting together. This is so much bigger than Donald Trump, right? And in some sense, it's much scarier when it's Trumpian toolbox in the hands of Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Jim Jordan, right? Okay, stipulate that this is so much bigger. And that whole conversation we had at the beginning of the week about like, why don't they quit him? Like they could quit him and like solve so many of their own internal problems. Okay, that is clearly like some Talmudic exercise that I cannot answer for you. But let me say this. I think I want to go back to where we started the week, which is it's not just Alvin Bragg. It's not just Fonnie Willis. It's not just Jack Smith. It's not just Judge Lou Kaplan, who, by the way, just announced that the jury is going to have to be anonymous because Donald Trump threatens the levers of justice.
Like a mob boss.
Like a mob boss. So I just want to posit that for all those millions of times that we've said the walls are closing in, there's not just one wall. It's not just Mueller. It's not just impeachment. This is happening on 6 fronts. It will soon be, I believe, 12 fronts because there's going to be knock-on effects to anything that happens. And what seems to be the case, and I think this is important, I mean, about blue slips, you're right. It's moronic and it goes to Jen's point about we're so in love with our norms and our civility and our like notion that we're the party of like, norms and reasonableness, that norms that exist in order to be racist, like the filibuster and the blue slip, like continue to get a pass. Okay. I cannot answer for that. It's insane. But what I want to just maybe slightly gently redirect us toward is that what is changing is that I think there is going to be accountability. I think there is going to be meaningful accountability at minimum about the Mar-a-Lago documents, at minimum about the Georgia election interference, and I'm hearing possibly Michigan election interference is coming. There's going to be consequences, I think, in some way, shape, or form around what was done with these documents and Stormy Daniels. So let's sit like slightly in this new position of it's not just one thing. And maybe the last thing I'll say before I flip it back to you is if we were smart, we would say in the manner of like stand up, not stand up, improv comedians, yes slash and bring
Yeah.
it all.
Yeah.
Rise Tide, indicts all boats. Why we are doing the thing where we're like whining about like, but why Alvin Bragg and why not Philly Willis and why are we Jeff Smith? Like that's the thing we do to ourselves that Jen is describing.
And I picked that up because you were talking a bit about that Monday, and it's also like this is not the writer's room. Like this is not like we sit around, but I understand why people say this stuff. Because it is the gut punches. It is Lucy pulling away the football. I know we're not supposed to be talking about sports.
No, that's like the perfect image for all of this, actually.
And for me, what's depressing about this is, I kind of know how this ends. Like, there's that great is it Maggie Smith, that great poem, about how you have to like kind of lie to kids because the world's a miserable place, but maybe you could make this place beautiful. Like, I kind of know how this ends because, white collar criminals, even when they have a comeuppance, always rehabilitate themselves. I've seen this before. And, it's all what we haven't seen. To me, I think what's really hard, although I have a good memory of the past, other than apparently Ted Lasso, but I have a good memory for criminal behavior and lack of accountability with Donald. What I don't have the ability to see at this moment is what things look like, a year from now. In other words, I don't have that, and I think
it's going to take a very long time for all of this to play out. But
I'm talking about the election, the big picture. I'm talking about like what we really keeping our eye on the prize, and what we really care about is the fact that we have a democracy and electoral system that is totally infected with this, with the big lie. And hey, Kurt. And so I'm concerned about, I know that these cases will take a long time, but what about our democracy? We don't have a lot of time.
Can I just say something really quick? Because I know Dahlia has to leave. And Dahlia, if you have to leave while I'm in the middle of talking, I totally get it. That's fine. I'm just so happy you were here. But I'm just wondering that I had a conversation with somebody the other day about Donald and accountability. And I said, one of the problems, and that to speak to your point, Dahlia, of why it's hard to have hope and why we sort of complain about the wrong things is because we get demoralized by the inaction. We get demoralized by the missteps. And then it's like, it's just frustration boiling over. But I think one way to look at it is he's not in prison. He probably will never be in prison. But by having to deal with all of these cases and be deposed and go to trial and testify, he is in the process of being held accountable, because guess what? I didn't have to do this month. I didn't have to pay lawyers billions of dollars to defend me against the, things I'm guilty for. I didn't have to answer to a judge. I didn't have to be deposed. I didn't have to lie to people in order to change the subject away from the fact that I'm about to be indicted on criminal felony charges. So, yeah, it's not enough, but it's not nothing either. So I'm with you. Like keep our eye on the ball here and recognize that in an imperfect system, a lot is happening. And we just need to hold tight. Otherwise, we're just completely undermining ourselves, and we're helping the media do its bad job, and we're helping the Republicans pretend that this is all just fine. Right? So anyway, thank you for being, I know you have to go. So I'm very excited that you came and spent some time and gave us hope.
I'm going to stick around for 4 minutes to hear Kurt say three smart things in the span.
Fabulous. Only 3? I mean, come on, 5 minutes. Kurt, I was just at the beginning, I just said that, not only have you been doing these great unpaid hits on MSNBC all week, but you had a really good piece in the LA Times about the fallacy of the Republican desire for an off-ramp. So, we've just been talking about how the media has been missing the boat all week, and that we've been sort of once again held in thrall to this manipulative toddler whose only goal is to change the subject and his own self-preservation. So how did you see this all playing out this week?
Well, it's interesting because I think that anytime that the media narrative is centered on anything regarding Donald Trump, that's a loser for the Republican Party. And I think
Interesting.
back to when Glenn Youngkin ran for governor of Virginia, and how painstakingly obvious it was that the last words that Glenn Youngkin wanted to utter out of his mouth were Donald Trump. He ran a very, to his point, successful campaign to
Mhm.
avoid Donald Trump, and by and large, it worked. He became the
Yeah.
governor of Virginia, a state that Joe Biden carried by 10+ points. And after that election, every Republican, every strategist was saying, "Well, there's the blueprint right there. That's what we need to do to win again." And of course, rather than actually follow that blueprint, they nominated people like Mehmet Oz, like Carrie Lake, like Herschel Walker. They doubled down on January 6th. And what happened in November? They lost all those races. Any race in which Donald Trump was really the hidden man behind the curtain, that was really what the race was about, Republicans lost those races. So what
Yeah.
happened after the November midterms election, in which Republicans' red wave never materialized? They all said, "Wow, that didn't work well for us. We need to get away from that. We need to move on from Donald Trump." What do they do as soon as they come back after the new year? They elevate Marjorie Taylor Greene. They elevate the crazy Jim Bankses of the world and the Matt Gaetzes of the world and the people that held Kevin McCarthy hostage so he can become speaker in name only. They made them more powerful and more visible. And so here we are now. And it's kind of ironic that all of this Donald Trump news came as the Republicans were gathering for their annual retreat, where they're
Yeah.
supposed to game out their legislative agenda, where they're going to talk about how they're going to, grow their majority and take back the Senate in 2024. And what did they end up spending their entire time talking about? Donald Trump. So I'm kind of in the mindset right now that the more the media wants to talk about Donald Trump, that's less that we're hearing about the Republican agenda. That's less that we're hearing about the Republican gaslighting and dishonesty. They are doing the job for us as Democrats right now. Joe Biden is going to get reelected, and he's never going to even have to leave the White House at this point, because the Republican Party has somehow put themselves in a position where they have to defend criminal activity. And while that might score you points with the super red areas of this country that would never vote for a Democrat under any scenario, they lose with every swing voter, every independent voter, every type of voter that might like a Liz Cheney, for instance, or an Adam Kingston. They'll never get them back when they're having to defend criminals.
I hope you're right. That's what
Is that
worries
three?
me. Oh,
I
sorry.
think we're at
Go
three.
ahead. Sorry.
I think we're at least three.
Well, and when and the final exclamation point on that for Dahlia is, when you are a party that's going to have to defend not just Donald Trump, but George Santos,
Yep.
and Jim Comer and Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz and any other bad actor. I mean, really, the Republican Party at this point is a criminal enterprise. It is organized crime.
Yeah.
You can't be the party of law and order on one hand and then go after people who enforce the law and file charges against criminals with the other. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
and thank you,
Dahlia,
Dahlia.
you are amazing. Thank you for
Thank
calling
you,
on
thank
Kurt
you.
to do 3 smart things.
That should be like a new segment. No pressure. No
No
pressure.
pressure.
But
I love
you
that,
guys
Kurt.
could totally handle it. I have no doubt in my mind. And I think, Kurt, what was troubling this week, and I agree with everything you just said, it's knowing that once again we are going to be fighting an uphill battle against the media. And just the fact that they've learned nothing, that they are so easily manipulated by this guy who, I mean, we said this earlier. They had one source for the fact that Donald was going to be indicted this week, and it was Donald.
And he was wrong.
And
he was outright
lying,
making stuff up.
He was lying. And Jen, I think I cut you off earlier. So if sorry, but we
That's
needed
all right.
the third smart
I know.
thing.
What makes
So
me worry,
Dahlia,
Kurt?
no.
So, like, you cheered me up, but then there's that voice in my head that's saying, Yeah, but the way the cognitive, it can go one of two ways. One way is the way you describe, which I want it to, where people say this is a bridge too far. I don't want criminals. I don't want a party full of criminals. The other thing, though, is that to resolve the cognitive dissonance of, but they like believe in the stuff I like. It's really easy for people to distinguish between, white collar crime and other types of crime,
Right.
and this is where I fear that he will be able to manipulate others and gain support by saying things like they did during the Mueller report. Well, obstruction really isn't a crime unless there's an underlying crime charge, which is not true. I mean, you can be found guilty of obstruction of justice if you destroy documents in civil litigation. I could go on, but my
Right.
fear is he's going to say, look, he's already doing all these business record things. It's not even a misdemeanor, but if it were a
Well,
big deal.
and I'll tell you, Jen, that's why I think the Stormy Daniels thing is so interesting, because of all the cases that Donald's going to have to defend, this is the one that is the easiest and most digestible for the average person to actually understand.
Sure.
Like this requires no explanation about tax policy or complicated financial matters. This is a guy paid off a porn star with hush money.
True.
That, and even though this might be the weakest of the three cases that Trump will have to defend himself against, it's the one that I do think everybody in this country can at least wrap their arms around.
And his name is on the checks, right? Yes.
But also,
Yeah.
I think what we need to make really clear, or what Democrats talking about this need to make really clear, is yes, everything you said happened, Kurt, but it was in the service of defrauding the American people before they cast their vote in November 2016. It wasn't just tax fraud. It was also election fraud, because
right.
vital information was withheld from voters via an illegal act. Is that accurate, Jen? Is that a fair
statement?
I guess
I guess there's two different things. There's what he gets charged with in under New York law, and then there's the other reality that this was a federal crime for which he won't be charged because neither Bill Barr nor Merrick Garland wanted to bring that case. Kurt makes a really good point, because I've noticed this in conversations with people, that the fact that this involves something scandalous like extramarital sex with a beautiful woman who also on the side makes adult films makes it something accessible to people. They'll talk about it, and then they'll actually say, but wait a second, he used his business to pay that back and he got a tax deduction for it.
Right.
I think that for those small businesses out there where maybe they're doing a little bit too much business with cash and not paying taxes or this or that, not many of them are using their businesses to pay back a lawyer for paying off a porn star. So you're right, Kurt. I don't think there's going to be a lot like that. Could be me.
Right. And I mean, Dahlia made this point on Tuesday, I believe, which is it's very difficult to transform this case into an attack on your version of America. This is not something people are going to be going into the streets to protest, because it's so tawdry and slimy, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the future of this country. Besides the fact, of course, that a lot of people who did go to January 6th, even if they were motivated to protest, a lot of them are in prison, and even those who aren't are feeling burned because the guy who told them to put themselves in that position is running for president again. So I don't know how many crowds he's going to be getting. So to your other point, Kurt, about the more the Republicans are talking about Donald, the better. I think that's true. But what worries me is that the longer, and I think we've seen this shift over the last 6 years, the longer things go without challenge, the frame changes. So in other words, we said earlier, a couple of decades ago, having a bad character would doom your political future, right?
Right.
And now it's sort of the normalization of criminality that the media aren't pushing back against. Of course, the Republicans aren't going to, but when the media talks about Donald Donald campaigning or DeSantis campaigning as if they're just two normal Republicans and not criminals on the one hand and fascists on the other, I think that makes it harder for people to tease out what's really going on and what they really potentially could be voting for.
Well, and this is where the Republicans again are kind of doing us a solid, because tomorrow, Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to lead a cohort of oversight Republicans to go visit defendants and insurrectionists in the DC jail.
No.
Yes.
Oh man.
And so it's like, man, talk about a very clear illustration.
Really?
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Wow. Are
They
they
are
bringing
gonna be doing
cameras
that.
because that
And
could
we're
be
paying
really...
for it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's when it's like, I guess if you want to change the conversation away from Donald Trump specifically, this is an interesting way to go about doing that. But again, this is something where the overwhelming majority of Americans believe that January 6th was a bad thing, that it was not a peaceful tourist visit or business as usual. This is one of the few places where there really is more, unanimity across party lines about what happened that day, despite what you hear from the crazies like Marjorie Taylor Greene. For them to use their platform to elevate domestic terrorists who are in jail and to try to recast them as political prisoners that are being treated unjustly, that's just not going to play very well, in my opinion. And again, there's no nuance here. This is not complicated. And so just as there's all this noise around Donald Trump right now, here comes Marjorie Taylor Greene to the rescue to make the contrast even more stark for any American who's tuning in.
Bless her heart, as they say in the South. Which, by the way, guys, for those of you who aren't from the South, doesn't mean what you would think it means. As far as I know, I don't know. I'm from
in the
Northeast.
Midwest. They say, which I can't stand, that's different.
It's sort of like, yeah, I think that's what they call a backhanded compliment. Oh my goodness gracious. But there has been this, one thing that I think we also need to try to figure out, because every nerd has been talking about some version of this for a very long time. We need to stop thinking that nuanced arguments are going to get us anywhere. Kurt, you just used the word blunt, to the point, right? I had a conversation with Tara Setmeyer a while back, and she's like, just put on your fucking brass knuckles. I don't know if she swore, but she swears. So I think that's a reasonable assumption to make. Put on your brass knuckles, guys. I mean, there's nothing, there's everything to lose. Everything is at stake. And we're speaking metaphorically, of course. But it gets a little weird when, I don't know if you guys saw this poll out of Florida. The percentage of people who would vote for Donald, the percentage of people who would vote for DeSantis was very high. And yet the same numbers flipped when you talked about gun control and climate change and women's right to choose. It's just, there's that disconnect in it. Like, the question that's always top of my mind is, what do you think you're voting for? You want gun safety. You want Roe back. You want the Dobbs decision undone. You don't agree with what the Supreme Court is doing. And on and on and on. Like, it is true when we are told that America is a left-leaning country, and yet in a state where everybody's checking off those boxes, they're still voting for DeSantis. They're still voting for Donald. And Kurt, that's kind of where I feel like, there's this point of contradiction that kind of jams us up. And I'm not really sure how to break through that.
Yeah, I mean, there's irony that the state that's going to suffer perhaps the most catastrophic consequences of climate change is the one that continually elects people who deny that there's a problem in the first place. Yeah. That will ultimately resolve itself, I suppose, one way or the other. But, I mean, this is the problem with our politics, I guess, is that people constantly vote against their own self-interest. The idea that the party that is for protecting billionaires, the party that is for treating corporations like individuals, is somehow also the party that's there for the real American everyman. It is a complete fallacy. The policies that the Republican Party champion hurts the MAGA faithful the most. Ironically enough.
Sorry. Go.
Well, go.
It reminds me of this whole dust up around this right-wing pundit Bethany Mandel, who was incapable of defining woke. But what was interesting about her,
but the reason that's funny is because she wrote a whole book about it.
But it was so. What's interesting is folks have gone back and looked at her Twitters and brought things back. And something a few years ago she said, I'm proof that anyone can make it in America. I started out with nothing but food stamps, Medicare, and it was all these
Social Security.
Programs. Right. And I made it. And it's like, okay, but that's the point, right? I mean, there's
the point.
And I think it would be interesting to, she's someone who I would find interesting having a conversation with. I could call it a debate where we could just say, like, what are you even talking about here?
Yeah.
Like, and and I think that maybe she's someone who's just made a living off saying these words that she doesn't really mean or understand, even though she doesn't seem that unintelligent. So there's no hope there. But I just feel like that disconnect that you're talking about, Mary, in Florida between what people say they want and who they vote for. I don't know how we get to that place without making people really clear that the candidates that are running support what they want. Although in Florida, who was it that again ran against DeSantis?
Rick Scott.
It was Scott. And so, maybe he just wasn't a candidate people liked.
Nope, he is not.
Wait. Ran against
not Rick Scott. I'm sorry, it was the other guy.
Val Demings ran against Rubio. Who ran against DeSantis?
Charlie Crist.
You're thinking Charlie of
Yeah. Because Chris had been governor.
Right. And so, he wasn't, and I thought Val Demings was great. I think the trouble is Rubio is just really popular.
Well,
for a number of reasons.
And there wasn't enough money invested in that race, in my opinion. But, Kurt, before you got here, I was talking. Oh, wait, before I get there, I just want to finish this up. Part of what we need to do is say there may be things that are more important to people than gun safety and climate change and women's rights. It may be more important to them that you can't say gay, that you ban books, and that you make drag shows illegal. Like, that may trump, if you'll forgive my use of the word, everything else. And unless and until we find that out, I don't know that we can come up with an effective strategy. And we also have to concede that we are fighting this fight in a framework that has been built over decades, which is Republicans are better at national security, law enforcement, all those things that are used to scare the shit out of people around election time. That's why Youngkin won, because he scared a bunch of white suburbanites about, CRT destroying our children or whatever. So yes, it's an uphill battle. But anyway, so Kurt, before you came on, I posited this question. We can't ignore Donald, unfortunately. I think everybody here wishes we could. That's the understatement of the millennium. But we can't, because the Republican Party continues to follow him and make him an incredibly powerful figure in American politics. However, it feels like this week would have been a really good time to ignore him. So how do we thread that needle? Because when you give him attention at the wrong time strategically, he takes advantage of it. He changes the narrative. He raises a bunch of money, and he demoralizes the rest of us because he somehow tricks a lot of people into thinking what he says is, one, valid, and two, important.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the problem, I think. One, the media ecosystem, which is bleeding viewership year over year, is so desperate, I think, to retain the audience that they have left, that Donald Trump's their catnip. When Trump is the center of attention, their ratings go up, they make more money. It's unfortunately a very basic business equation for them. I think that the Republicans in Congress play right into that hands too, because they see what's going on. The chairman of the congressional committee start launching investigations into the Manhattan DA. Everyone covers that, and that's another thread. That's just one step removed from Donald Trump. All the while, the idea that somehow Democrats and the president are going to be able to get the media to now pay attention to, hey, it was Conservation Land Week. The president just designated 500,000 acres of new wilderness to protect. They're not going to give a crap about that, unfortunately. That's just the reality of the world. Which is why I kind of go back to what you and Tara talked about. It's like, well, then Democrats need to put their big boy pants on and just start beating the shit out of people. Metaphorically speaking, not literally speaking. People, but they need to not tiptoe around the issues and the Republicans. They need to just use a rhetorical bludgeon and constantly knock them out with it. I still think to this day, all these years later, that's something Democrats struggle with, is how to even talk about the Republican Party right now and Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis and all of their ilk. I often get chastised by the powers that be because my rhetoric is sometimes too strong, or my responses are out of character with the president's tone. And to me, it's like, again, I've said this so many times, I love the sentiment behind, when they go low, we go high. But you need to understand, when we go high, they kick us in the balls. So maybe we got to stop doing it that way, folks.
Yeah, and I had to be honest, I don't know what Michelle Obama meant, whatever, it rhymes. But when she said that, it didn't bother me because I interpreted it a particular way. Everybody else interpreted it differently and gave her a lot of shit. Jen, in my view, what that meant was, when they go low, we don't cheat, lie, and steal. But if we have to get into the mud and metaphorically beat the shit out of them because they're trying to destroy democracy, then that, to me, that's going high. We're not cheating, we're not lying, we're not stealing, but we are fighting the good fight. We are angry in a way that is righteous, right? We are fighting for the right things for everybody. It's like, they want to kill us, we want to give them health care.
So, as a student of English literature back in the day, when we talked about the so-called death of the author, it doesn't really matter what the author intended, Mary. It's how
you're going to go there, aren't you?
I'm going to go there. And so that phrase, when they go low, we go high, has tended to be used to get people to slow their roll and not be tough and just like turn the other cheek. And I know I've recently heard from a certain actor who knows these things that turn the other cheek wasn't meant to say be mild and mean something different. But anyway, once again, the idea is, I do think it makes people sit back instead of sit up and stand up and use their voice and say enough, right?
Yeah.
It's used, unfortunately, to silence people and pray for the best, as opposed to whatever she originally meant by it, is my concern.
So basically, the message I'm getting from our show today is that the nerds need to take over. We need to be running the show. So Dahlia Lithwick, Kurt Bardella, Jen Taub, thank you guys so much for being here. You helped me in so many ways. You have no idea. This was amazing. So let's hope that people are listening, and we're gonna take things back, and we're gonna right the wrongs and get justice for everybody. An easy task. Thanks, guys, so much. I'll see you soon. Thanks for joining us. I know we had a little different format tonight, but I think what happened this week was really important. It kind of jolted me into an awareness that we have not made the progress we need. The media has not learned, it's not evolving, it is not fit to deal with this situation that is apparently unique to them. So I really did want to I wanted to get the nerds in to talk about what we covered tonight, partially to I don't know, get us on a more even keel, but also to help us reset expectations and focus on what's really crucial, which is not the circus that has been surrounding the will he be indicted? Won't he be indicted? Is this important? Is this not important enough? No, we need to stay focused on what matters. So thank you again, Dahlia, Jen, Kurt. Always love talking to them, and to all of you for joining us tonight. We will be back, of course, tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific for House of Horrors, and Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific for the nerds. And then next Thursday, we'll be back for our regular interview show, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. All of those you can check out at youtube.com/Politicon. While you're there, if you haven't watched the show live, or even if you have, you can subscribe. And that way you'll get notified every time a new video drops, and you can like the episode. You can leave a comment on the episode if you're watching a recording of it, and you can listen to all of the shows in podcast form on Apple or wherever you get your podcast. 5-star reviews are much appreciated. They really do help us grow the show. And I think it's safe to say, if you're listening consistently, the nerds deliver, the guests deliver, and, all of these people need to be heard. We are in for some pretty rocky times. And, you want the most informed people giving you information. Plus, they also happen to be amazing human beings, which makes it all worthwhile in my book. Also wanted to announce again that we're going on the road. Yes, the Mary Trump Show with the Nerd Adventures will be live on stage. We're going to be, I'm totally going to forget the dates, but we're going to be in Chicago, San Francisco, Portland, and New York City. For all of the information you need, go to politicon.com/tour. And if you use the code NERDS, NERDS, you can get tickets that are on pre-sale right now. Instead of listening to the nonsense that is being shoveled at us this week in the media about the non-event in New York City and the protests that never happened and all the rest of it, go to politicon.com/tour, use the promo code NERDS, and you can get tickets which are on pre-sale right now. So you will have your choice of the best seats. And again, it's Chicago. I don't want to get the dates wrong. Nobody's helping me out here. I think it's, you know what? I don't want to guess. Just go to politicon.com/tour. The whole calendar will be there. May 7th, Chicago. May 9th, we will be somewhere on the West Coast. We'll be in Portland, Oregon. May 10th, we'll be in San Francisco. And May 16th, we will be in my hometown, New York City. It's going to be amazing. So I hope as many of you who can be there will be there. It's going to be a blast, and we have a lot in store for you. You're going to love it, I promise. And that is it for tonight. Thank you so much again to my guests, and thank you so much to all of you for supporting us. We appreciate it more than we can say. We will see you tomorrow at noon for House of Horrors. In the meantime, please stay safe and be kind.
Thank you.